Welcome to Our Voices. Today is May 7th, 2021. Again, I have a special interview today. I have three guests that's on the panel, two that are crusaders in the fight against the war on drugs, and I do have a criminal defense attorney. Again, I do hope that you enjoy this. This is a very lengthy interview today, and also just want to let you know that some of you have already formed your opinion. And I do hope that you will watch this with an open mind. And again, please share your thoughts and questions after. You can also chime in on Facebook Live as well. This is Our Voices. Welcome to Our Voices. I do have three special guests right now. And again, we're going to talk about the needle exchange / harm reduction program. It's a hot topic in the city of Charleston, West Virginia. My guest I have with me, I have Ms. Brooke Parker, I have Joe Solomon, and I have Rico Moore. Ladies and gentlemen, how you all doing?
Doing well.
Good. Again, I do have some questions. Again, we're going to bounce around. If there is something I've missed, please feel free to give your voice, give your opinion on the matter, okay? All right, let's get it started. But before I start, ladies first, Brooke, please give a little brief something about yourself. Give me something about Brooke.
All right, so I'm originally from West Virginia. I moved to Charleston about a year and a half ago. I'm a social worker with CAMC in the Ryan White program. So I work mostly with people who use drugs, IV drug users, and people that are HIV positive. I've worked in mental health for almost 20 years now, and I'm a harm reductionist. I'm a person in long-term recovery, and I'm glad to be here.
Joe.
My name is Joe Solomon. I'm a social worker based here in Charleston. I got a master's in social work from Marshall University. And you might know me by my really cute pup, whose name is Cicada, and she might stop by later. She's kind of famous. So,
all right.
She's been in the Gazette, not quite as much as I have, but she's been in.
And Rico.
My name is Rico Moore. I'm from here in Charleston. Went to law school at Texas Southern University. I'm an attorney, criminal defense attorney, majority of the time. I also do some civil rights stuff and some volunteer stuff with a few organizations.
Okay. All right, let's get this started. As you well know, there have been some heated exchanges in City Council in Charleston. And first of all, I have to ask this question again. Your group, SOAR. Please let folks know what the SOAR stands for and what's the purpose. Brooke, Joe.
Okay. You almost gave that one to Brooke. That was like a little misdirection.
I know, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's really important to set these conversations. You know, we can get heated about harm reduction, and it's helpful to dig into it because there's a lot of misconceptions and a lot of stigma and a lot of good questions. And what we should also acknowledge is what's not really ever on the front page of our news, but really ought to be every day. And that's the overdose crisis and the HIV crisis and the Hep C crisis that we have in Kanawha County and how we got here. And that story is also SOAR's story because we didn't really exist before we ended up in the true mess that we're in now. And so it's worth going back to March 2018 when our harm reduction program, which we had at the health department, a very accessible, best practice program, nationally recognized, was humming along. And we had a mayor who said he wasn't going to run for office anymore. And that had been 15 years that mayor had been in office. But he still wanted to have some power. So he chose someone else to run. So Danny Jones chose J.B. Akers. And you might be like, oh, I thought we were talking about harm reduction. Why are we talking about politics? Because this stuff is really important and very much connected. Harm reduction has been largely politicized, which is how we've gotten where we are. And so Danny Jones chose J.B. Akers, but no one really heard of J.B. Akers, right? He was a city clerk, I think, but pretty much a no-name. Does CrossFit, fit guy. I don't know if he's as fit as Rico, so that's up for debate. And he's tall, he's handsome, he's got the ingredients for a politician, but nobody really heard of him. So it was clear that they baked a campaign that said, if we target harm reduction, harm reduction serves people who use drugs, and they're the most easy group to punch down on. If we punch down on these people who use drugs and we blame them for our problems, and then we can elevate this candidate into the mayor's office. And so that was the strategy they chose, right? So, and this is, this is the story of harm reduction in Charleston. It's a script that was written in 2018. It's a stain that was set so deep into the fabric of our city that we still can't get it out. So J.B. Akers ran on that. He said, I'll never let the harm reduction start a program again. He said, he called the line of people at the Kanawha Charleston harm reduction program a nationally recognized public health service. He called that line a cattle call.
Joe,
this stuff is key. He spent a year on that. And while his campaign was not victorious, we don't really use his name every day. His campaign was victorious in a lot of ways. That program has not been restarted. And all the prophecies that were made by scientists and public health experts that we will end up in an HIV outbreak, that we will end up with so many preventable losses of life came true. And so SOAR got started as a community group of people, largely people in recovery, people with rich lived experience, largely family members who'd seen a lost loved one, came together during the heyday of that election, but largely towards the end when harm reduction was being called a cattle call and some nails were being stamped in its coffin, and started to have a year of community meetings. So SOAR stands for Solutions Oriented Addiction Response. Solutions Oriented Addiction Response. And it's a grassroots group that got started to challenge the stigma that had become so prevalent in our city, so thick, and to come together and figure out solutions together. So it got started with a year of big monthly community meetings held at St. John's Episcopal Church with about 50 people each. The mayor attended one or two, a couple city councilors came, but largely they they didn't really come.
Now, the birth of SOAR, it sounds like you got your blessings from Danny Jones. Is that correct? You got your blessings from him?
No.
No?
I think if it wasn't for Danny, we wouldn't need SOAR. Right? So Danny worked with JB to demonize harm reduction in the city of Charleston, was terribly successful. And SOAR came out as a grassroots response to that, saying, look, our city is demonizing people who use drugs. We've got to sort of hold the line for the best of our city.
Okay, so explain, because again, I'm going back and I'm coming forward, okay? So this needle exchange, at some point, it was taking place in the health department. Am I correct?
That's right.
Okay, so Danny Jones stopped that, correct?
Yeah, his administration stopped it. He weaponized his police chief to essentially handicap and gut the program and had it shuttered.
Okay, so now that you have done that, well, now that they have shut down the needle exchange in the health department, who started giving out needles? Your group, right?
So the timeline is in March 2018, our nationally recognized harm reduction program in the city of Charleston, the first one in the state to be politically attacked, buckled. SOAR saw that and we thought, well, that sucks, right? That's really hard. That's not what our city is all about. Our city is a welcoming place. Our people care about each other. Our people come together when there's a coal crisis or a water crisis. We take care of our own. This didn't feel like the best of us. This felt like the worst of us. So SOAR did not immediately move to say, hey, why don't this scrappy community group figure out how to run a nationally recognized program? We thought that program should just get restarted. You know, like the health department should be given a directive from the next mayor to get going again, right? Because we got a new mayor, right? There was that election, and that Danny Jones's scion did not get elected, right? Amy Goodwin got elected, thank goodness, right? So we spent the next year meeting with the mayor, hosting community forums, and agitating and advocating for our public institutions to restart this program. And that didn't happen. And as that didn't happen, we paid a dear price. Between 2018 and 2019, and again, that program was shut down in the March of 2018, 1% of Kanawha County was diagnosed with hepatitis C. And in public health circles, Hep C is often seen as a precursor. That kind of outbreak is a precursor to an HIV outbreak. So we saw the writing on the wall for the HIV outbreak, and still no action, Meanwhile, in Huntington, they were going through an HIV crisis. Without digging too much into that, they had about 200 fatal overdoses in Huntington in 2017, about 200. And they, at some point in 2018, 2019, stretched their harm reduction program to sort of get more Narcan into the community and see more people. And by 2019, they'd halved it. So in 2017, they had about 200 fatal overdoses, and in 2019, it was about 100. So Huntington was stretching and flexing, and we were doing the opposite. We were doubling down on our stigma. We were doubling down on our inaction, and we paid a dear, dear price. While Huntington and Cabell County have their overdoses, ours now lead the state and have seen no such progress. So after a year of watching more loved ones lose loved ones, and watching more Hep C and watching the precursor for an HIV outbreak that we're now in, after a year of that, that was when SOAR started to drive around and just connect with people who use drugs, people who hang out, you know, in our parks, or walk down our streets, or walk under our bridges, or wherever folks are. And we just started to ask them, what do you need? You know, because it's clear that our city and our county isn't delivering what you need. We're seeing it in the statistics and the GoFundMe's for funeral expenses, you know. And people said, we need Narcan and we need sterile equipment. And it was around that time that SOAR started to experiment with, well, maybe we can just make that happen.
Brooke, jump in. The part where people the community was blasting you all because, again, you all were giving out needles. Tell me this right here. What did you get any blowback from the community by any chance for doing this?
I don't know that I understand the question.
Okay. What I'm saying is, now, correct me if I'm wrong, that you all were passing out needles in the Unitarian Church in the parking lot?
We started needs-based harm reduction program. It's community-based, it's grassroots. We worked really hard to make sure that it was a lot more than just passing out needles. I know that that's what gets a lot of the attention, and it's obviously of major concern in Kanawha County, and that's a huge piece of this, but I think it's also really important to not just talk about syringes, because that's a very small piece of what we were working to put together, because what we saw was a huge gap in services that the pandemic really just, the pandemic, as we all know, it put extreme stressors on all of us. So in 2020, when we started handing out syringes, we were not handing out syringes before that, just so we know. I think that also gets, the information gets convoluted, and it's really easy to say that SOAR's been at this for, handing out syringes every week for 2 years, and that's not accurate. We started really when the pandemic hit, was when we saw the need grow, and we felt obligated to meet it, because it doesn't cost that much money to run a harm reduction program. And if a handful of volunteers can do it in their spare time, we thought that we should do it. We felt like that was what the community members that we know, there's a lot of members in this community, and everyone's got a voice, and everyone's got an opinion, and everyone's got a need. I think that's the other really important piece of this. So to answer your question, we weren't just handing out needles, that's part of it, but we started our street outreach, and it started in the backs of cars and parking lots on the west side, because that was after talking with people that are experiencing the problem. That's where a lot of this starts, is it doesn't generally start with service providers. It starts with people that are experiencing the problem, because they're the experts on the problem. That's who we go to first. We learned that they need Narcan. They needed low barrier. That's a big piece of this, is they needed low barrier harm reduction services. So that's, harm reduction includes food and blankets, and access to birth control and medical care. It's HIV testing and recovery coaching and wound care, and information on safer injection practices, and education about feminine hygiene products and safer sex practices, and referral to care all over the community. But the West Side, unfortunately, as it's been highlighted in the news a lot lately, the West Side is lacking in accessible community care, right? That's where, that's been a huge need lately. The East End is pretty well saturated. It's not hard to get care if you're on the East End. So we decided, and there is already a harm reduction program on the East End. So when we decided on the West Side, that was why we decided that, because the people that we talked to were concentrated there, and they're the ones that needed the services, and they needed linkage to care. So we did start passing out sterile injection equipment. I think it's important that it's not just needles. Again, this is, it's a whole range of supplies. I know everyone's been out of shape about just that one word, but this is a whole range, and it's a huge conversation. So it's safer use kits is what we like to refer to them as. And also, I think it's important to understand that we didn't come up with this idea, grassroots-based harm reduction or needs-based harm reduction. This is what communities all over the country, all over the world do when public health is failing to meet a need. We didn't invent grassroots harm reduction. I'd love to take credit for that, but we didn't.
Enrico, give me your position on this topic here. Where do you stand? Do you stand as legal counsel for SOAR?
I have.
Okay.
They approached me when they started having some issues concerning the needle exchange, and there was an issue at one point of whether or not they were breaking the law. And I looked at it and I analyzed it, did a little research, and after I took a look at it, no, they were not. As it was written at the time, the statute in our municipality, it was poorly written and ambiguous as could be, so it's unenforceable. So basically took a look at it and they went on about their business. And there was nothing the state or the county or the city could do. So eventually they've gone on and they've changed that law. But the reason that I became involved is because, you know, as Joe said, Joe asked, well, what do you need? That's what he asked a lot of the people that were on the street in terms of the users and so on and so forth. And, you know, and then they looked at as Brooke said, the gap in services. And the gap in services is on the west side, right? And those services are really lacking in the community on the west side. And the majority of the people on the west side are of what color?
Black, yeah.
Black.
Yeah.
Well, I work in the criminal the criminal defense area of the law. That's what I do. I work in the courthouse. I'm in the courthouse every day. So I noticed this a long time ago. Majority of these people that they call drug dealers are also drug users. All right. When we look at the criminal, I don't want to keep saying the word criminal. All right. When we look at the judicial system and we think of Black people, we think of criminals. When you look at the numbers, we disproportionately do what? Go to jail. But we also have programs out there such as drug court. I looked at those numbers, and when you look at the numbers for drug court, we disproportionately do not go. We don't get an opportunity for drug court. So I talked to Joe, and I know Joe socially. So I took a look at what SOAR was doing, and I took a look at what was going on in the courthouse, and I know what's going on in the community as far as the rise in opioid use in our community was just as high as the rise in the white community, right? My uncles, I was born, shit. It's not a day in my life my uncles were not addicted to drugs, not crack, heroin, pills. Still are, all right? At least one is. So I took a look at it and I said, well, what we don't get is adequate medical care in our community. That's a fact, nationwide. What we don't get is an opportunity in the criminal justice system for rehab or drug court. Now, if we don't get those things, and our rise in our community is just as high as everywhere else, and when you look at the CDC, 30 years of research, it shows you that when you have a high population of intravenous drug users, you're going to also have a high population of Hep C and HIV. Well, if the people from my community are not getting adequate medical care and they aren't getting an opportunity for rehab or for drug court, who's going to be left out there that's going to have this rise, this huge rise in Hep C and HIV? Because we don't go to drug court, we don't get into rehab. So who's left out here to suffer because they can't get adequate services? Just logically, it would be us. So,
I see your point. Okay.
So in my mind, it was needed throughout Kanawha Valley, but it was definitely needed in the Black community. So I saw no reason not to sign on to help them continue what they were doing, because by helping them, I also helped my community.
Okay. So as you stated, and you say the majority of needle users are white. Is that what you saying that, right?
No, I didn't say that.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I said the rise in the opioid use was mirrored in the Black community, just as, just like the white community. Our opioid use rose just as much as the white community. Although when you look at commercials, so on and so forth, and you talk about it and you think about it, it's put out there that this happens predominantly in white communities.
Okay.
That's not true. It happens just as much in our community. We just don't get the help. So in my mind, SOAR would help us even more because we don't get adequate medical care and we don't get any help when it comes to the court system, because they just send us to jail and all we do is go in, come out, get high, go in, come out, get high. They don't give us any help. So in my mind, the help that SOAR provided, it did help the entire community, but it definitely would help us, and it's going to help protect us from Hep C and HIV.
Joe, question. Where do we stand as far as the needle exchange? Are you still doing it, or have you stopped?
We paused the public health fairs, and we paused the public health fairs on the west side even before the new city ordinance was passed that basically made listening to the CDC a misdemeanor. We paused out of respect for some West Side community leaders and members who wanted to have more conversations with us. I think
okay. Well, Joe, I'm sorry, Ray, but I'm going to cut you off here for a second, Joe. They paused because a lot of people from the Black community came forward and said that they didn't like them in the community, and a lot of people started to talk about needle litter and so on and so forth. And they paused out of respect. And my position is, I think maybe the way that they came in the community was probably not right, probably not proper, but it was done with good intention. So I think that it should have really been an opportunity for the two communities to talk and to better educate themselves on each other. And I don't think it's going to help the community whatsoever when you watch the numbers, because now I think Charleston has been named as one of the largest hot spots in the United States, isn't it, for HIV?
Now,
the largest outbreak in the U.S.
The largest outbreak.
Just so we know.
So here's
and of that outbreak, what's the percentage of those people who happen to be African American?
Right. Here's a question: why wasn't the community consulted? I understand you're headstrong in wanting to help, be outreach to help people. Why wasn't the community involved or consulted?
I think there's a few ways to dig into that. And I'm happy to go first, but I feel like, Brooke, you also might have really good insights here. First, I can't stress enough that we had a year of monthly town halls about this subject. The city hasn't had a single town hall about the overdose crisis. But SOAR, this grassroots little group, figured out how to get pizza and get a room in a church and have people come together. And it wasn't everything that we needed. They were largely only in St. John's Episcopal Church with about 50 people, but we would invite leaders from throughout the community very often. I sent many texts to Councilwoman Farr, who in the end led the campaign to make this work a misdemeanor. And Councilwoman Farr never made it to one of these events, unfortunately. So we did some of this work. Again, did we have these events on the West Side? No, we didn't. And that was a failure. That was definitely a failure, especially given that we knew at the time that the West Side and Kanawha City are both major hotspots for overdose calls, right? So we should have really thought that through better. Secondly, when we ask ourselves, hey, how come you didn't reach out to the community? That question very much sets up that there's a community of people that use drugs and that don't really count, and there's a community of people that don't use drugs. That is what we mean when we say community. So when we use the word community, we hold them both. We hold them both, and when the CDC uses the word community, when they say the CDC encourages consultations as well for harm reduction programs. And the number one part of the community that they say you should consult with, the number one, first and foremost, is people who use drugs, right? So we were consulting again and again with the needs of the community, people who use drugs throughout this process. And it showed, because as these health fairs just kept growing and growing, 200 people, 250 people, upwards of 300 people seen at a health fair on a Saturday. Those are people that were giving us input, and SOAR has never been anything but responsive to the needs of our community and the needs of the people that we serve. So that's a secondly. And thirdly, I think the question is, well, how come, you didn't reach out to even more people, more pastors, more community members, more people living down the block? And I think those people make a really good and important point. They're right. And we dropped the ball. And as Rico said, we had a missed opportunity there, or however you said it, like we could have done much better. So for folks who feel that way, we're really sorry. We're unapologetically sorry, and we want to get better as we go, because the crisis isn't going to go away, and we want to figure out how to build better with everyone there and everyone across the city. And for a little bit of context, when we were running in the experiments in the fall of 2019 and in early 2020, when it started to grow a little bit before it really ballooned with COVID, right? That was when our services, we just exposed the huge gap that Brooke talked about. So we started to sort of experiment a little bit and connect with people and drive around the whole city and open up the trunks of our cars. When we started to do that, you might ask, Ray, like, how come you didn't go on Facebook and share with the whole big Charleston community that you were doing this? Or how come you didn't talk and do interviews with the Gazette about it, et cetera, et cetera? Or how come you didn't have town halls to say, hey, we're cranking open our Subaru trunks to run grassroots harm reduction? What do you think about that? And the reason is because at the time, well, we could have done much better. Obviously, we did drop the ball. And the atmosphere then is that we didn't know what would happen in terms of if we'd be criminalized for it. So we knew we were doing what the CDC says we needed to do, but we didn't know how the law would shake. So Rico said he consulted with the law, he did his research, he told us, look, you're not breaking the law, but it hadn't gone through a court yet. It hadn't gone through any public court proceeding or anything like that. And so we were just quiet. So we were engaging some pastors on the west side and some neighbors on the west side and some pastors and neighbors everywhere around the city, but it wasn't nearly at scale, in large part because we dropped the ball, and in some part because we were operating from a place of fear.
Okay, let me stop right there. You said you did consult with some pastors?
That's right.
Which ones?
Some of them may not.
Yeah. Wait, what was that, Rico?
Nothing. You go forward.
I do have like names that I want to start dropping here, and these are folks that have not come out publicly to support us, and we've asked for meetings in the sort of afterglow of city council making a misdemeanor. So I'd understand if that makes you, Ray, be like, I don't know if they're telling the truth or something like that. But
no. What I'm saying is, I mean, because you said you consulted with some pastors. I'm just asking, which ones did you talk to?
Well, I fully understand the question, and especially when it comes to pastors on the west side who we haven't had meetings with, I don't feel terribly comfortable name dropping.
Well, I have a question, Ray.
Yes.
Yeah.
These people are upset about the needle exchange and the entire harm reduction program being on the west side, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are they going to do about this huge outbreak of HIV that's going on in Kanawha County? It just seems to me some of these people are just upset at the way that they came into the community. Okay, cool. They apologize, get over it, and look at the good that they bring. That's all that's my take on it. And I hear people screaming about so-and-so overdose. Well, they were overdosing before SOAR came about. They talk about the needles. SOAR doesn't hand out needles right now. There's still needle litter. There was needle litter prior to 2020. They only began to give out needles in 2020, correct, Joe?
Well, we had some street outreach that was running at a much smaller scale in the fall, in the late fall and winter of 2019, but it really started to grow and grow. And the pandemic in April 2020 is when things went.
But they had needle litter in 2018 and 2019 as well, right?
That's
so,
and the scale that we were operating at in the fall when we were kind of figuring out what this would look like is honestly microscopic compared to what it blew up to when the pandemic hit and what it grew into over the couple of months over the summer. We were seeing 250, 300 people at a time.
Yeah,
every single week. It was, yeah.
I don't know much about the political backdrop of, JB and the former mayor and so on and so. I don't know much about that. All I know is when I'm in the courtroom and I watch the people go to jail, they look like me. When I watch the people go to rehab or go to drug court, they look like Joe. They look like Brooke. They don't look like you and me at all, Ray. Very rarely, you know.
So okay. So, but now back to your question. You asked me. You said, "What is the community? What is their stance on it?"
No, what is their plan to combat the high rate of AIDS and of HIV and Hep C in the community?
I think at this point right now, again, I can't speak for the community. I'm guessing that what's the community's plan? I think first and foremost, they're going to protect their house. They're going to protect their family.
Okay.
But they shouldn't feel like I'm sure they're probably thinking they shouldn't feel like a prisoner, that they can't go out anywhere in their neighborhood or enjoy their neighborhood because of a dirty needle here on the ground here and there.
Exactly.
You know,
that's right. But check this out, right?
Go ahead.
If they're handing out clean needles, which causes the HIV rate and the Hep C rate to go down, right? Wouldn't you feel safer going out because these people are giving out clean needles and they've caused the HIV and the Hep C rate to go down? Versus right now, you go out, they're not giving out needles, and the HIV rate and the Hep C rate is through the roof, the highest in the nation.
Good point. Now, think about this right here. Joe, don't take this the wrong way. Joe Blow over here gets high. He shoots up.
Okay.
He falls out. The needle is there. Okay. So we're talking about protecting folks from HIV and Hep C. Well, who's it protecting from? What if that child, what if a child is out playing, running around, and trip and fall and come in contact with a needle? Is it protecting them?
Wait a
minute. I'm playing devil's advocate right now. But I mean, again, we're trying to get it going. So
but you're making my point. That's my point. That's happening right now, even though they're not giving out needles. And the AIDS rate and the Hep C rate is through the roof. So if they are giving out needles and they lower the AIDS rate and the Hep C rate, wouldn't you rather take it's going to happen. It is happening, right?
So do we have numbers? Do you have numbers?
CDC, Brooke.
Okay. Brooke, do you have numbers?
You're asking a lot of different questions.
The numbers in terms of, we're talking about, I think he wants the numbers from the explosion of the HIV situation in Kanawha County.
Is that what you're asking?
Well, let me just preface that with the health department has pretty readily admitted that there was no HIV testing going on at the beginning of the pandemic because of difficulties presented by just getting out to people when the start of the pandemic, or with the start of the pandemic. Then it got harder and harder and harder and harder as it went on in that first month or so, just to figure out how to get out to people and how to get people out for testing. So most testing efforts stopped. There was a handful of really amazing efforts going on around the city through the pandemic. Local providers collaborated and they were set up at the really high risk areas on the East End and with service providers on the East End. And what we saw happening though was the people on the West Side were just kind of stuck. There was nowhere for them to go for these public testing events because walking from the West Side to the East End in the winter, when it's cold, when it's raining, it's next to impossible to do that. So people were not making these pop-up events that were happening pretty regularly, like the collaboration that happened throughout the pandemic. Of course, like it blows my mind the way providers were able to come together and make sure that people were cared for. But again, most of that happened on the East End with established service providers. I'm not knocking it. That's incredible. It needed to happen. But what we saw happen was people on the West Side were left high and dry yet again. And so the other piece of all of this too is that I'd really love to talk about this idea of a low barrier program or a needs-based program, because we're only talking about syringe exchange. Those are the words being used. We're talking about syringe litter and syringe exchange. And CDC says on their website, on any materials put out, the research shows that needs-based is, Joe, help. It's been a long time. My numbers are escaping me.
Best practice.
It's best practices, because what it shows is that People are more likely, that's 5 times more likely to come into recovery through a needs-based low barrier harm reduction program than they are all the other methods that are out there, right? They're more likely to engage in, and what recovery looks like, a lot of different things for a lot of different people. There's many pathways to recovery. That's what I fell in love with about harm reduction, is this idea that I'm in abstinence-based recovery. That's worked really well for me. Opioids almost killed me, but I had a very different situation than a lot of people, and abstinence-based recovery works beautifully for me. It has for going on 14 years now, but that doesn't work for everyone. So access to medication-assisted treatment, access to everything that comes along with that, sober living, the peer recovery services that we have available throughout the state now. Recovery looks different for everyone, and for a lot of people, it's not going to be abstinence-based, and it's not going to be, I'm going to stop doing drugs. A lot of it is harm reduction. So I'm going to use drugs in a safer way, or I'm going to start using drugs less so that I can work up to a point where I can figure out what's right for me. We don't tell people really in any other situation what's good for them. People get to make choices about their medical care all the time. That's part of our right? That's what it means. But we love telling people who use drugs exactly what they need to do to look better, to be acceptable. And harm reduction works really hard to meet people exactly where they're at. We try really hard not to say there's one way, because there isn't just one way. There's a lot of different ways. So harm reduction programs don't just meet people where they're at. It's also providing a safe place for people to bring their syringes back to. When you don't have a one-for-one exchange, people are likely to participate. They're more likely to come back. You don't get kicked out for the million reasons why your needles could get stolen or lost.
Hey, Joe, I have a question here. Now, you say you have suspended operations, right? You've suspended.
Yeah, I also want to get into your question, Ray, as Rico and Brooke have done about the syringe litter issue, because unfortunately, that's where a lot of the conversation ends up. And I feel like if we can spend a little more time on it, if that's okay with you, we might be able to help listeners wrestle with it a little better.
Okay, we will. I mean, we will come back to it. Okay, we will come back to it.
I have 2 thoughts I'd love to share real quick if I can.
We'll go for it.
Okay, one is that there's a myth that harm reduction programs create syringe litter, right? That myth right there is what undergirds and underscores much of the debate around harm reduction. And it turns out that it's a myth that makes a lot of logical sense. It makes sense. Oh my gosh, they're giving out syringes. It's going to cause syringe litter. So it makes sense. And 30 years of research, 3 decades of research show that there's a counterintuitiveness that is present there, that it turns out that that's not true. So why is that not true? Why are folks like us being like, let's run needs-based harm reductions? Because we also care about syringe litter. We don't want our kids or our pups to step on syringe litter. Again, whole community approach. We care just as much as y'all care, right? So why is it that we're so advocating about this when, Ray, you raised the issue of, well, what if this kid lands on a syringe, right? Like, we care about that too. So why is it that programs don't increase syringe litter? Well, there's a few reasons why. One is that they build trust with people so that people bring stuff back. We don't punish people, but we build trust with them. SOAR gave out thousands and thousands of syringe litter containers, more than any other program possibly in the state. It's not talked about much. When we had visitors to our program, we've had many visitors. They're shocked. They're like, oh, nobody knows. I wish more people knew. Well, it's true. It's true. We gave out thousands of these, and we collected them, and we processed them. We gave hundreds of pounds to the medical disposal service company. And so that is one way that programs can neutralize or reduce syringe litter, by building trust with people. And that's what doctors do all the time for people with diabetes. They say, I'm going to give you these syringes. I expect and trust you either dispose of them properly or to bring them back to me, right? In fact, our city and our county and our state is blanketed with hundreds, if not thousands, of syringe exchange programs, right? Those are doctors that treat diabetes. They're trusting people to deal with their syringe litter, and we trust people too. And we give them the tools they need.
So basically,
there's also the factor that you have to take into account that people who use these syringes also value them.
That's right.
So they don't often want to just readily discard them, like, used, throw it away. They value them. They hold on to the good ones as much as possible. rather than having to build their own rig out of who knows what, which is what they do a lot.
Right.
So they have value. They put value on these clean syringes, believe it or not.
So the misunderstanding is you give the needles, they use the needles, but when they get high and they leave them such a place, it's your responsibility.
No,
that's the misunderstanding. Am I right? If I'm wrong, tell me.
If I'm using drugs and I'm using them, someplace that's safe, well, I'm not, because we don't have supervised consumption sites in this city, right? So now I'm chased into some shadow. Maybe I'm chased into some playground because there's some cover. And so now I'm using drugs, and let's say I want to get rid of, let's say Rico's wrong, and I want to get rid of that syringe because I have a lot more maybe. Or for some reason it's that syringe's last day and I want to get rid of it. And now if I keep that syringe on me and I walk on my way to deliver it to a garbage bin, well, where am I going to find a garbage bin? In a 90 square mile county, there's only one syringe disposal bin. That's Kanawha County, right? So there's not really many places for me to put it. So that's a solution that we can work on together. We can set up more bins. But let's say I'm going to walk to that garbage bin. I've got this syringe on me. It's used. I'm going to bring it to that bin. I'm doing it the right way. Well, now I'm thinking, if a police pulls me over and sees me with this syringe and it's got a trace amount of drug in it, well, I might get a felony charge. So why don't I just shove it in that playground? Maybe I'll take the sharp part off, break it off, use my heel of my shoe and bury it somewhere so no one gets hurt. A lot of syringes you find actually have a bit of harm reduction layered on top of them that way. And I do that. Well, how do we solve that? How do we solve that fear around safe disposal? Because that's what our city is covered in, right? That's actually how we reduce syringe litter. And there's a way to do that. The whole state of North Carolina saw this issue and they came together in a very Republican legislature and said, well, let's deal with this. And what did they do? They passed a law that says if you're pulled over by a police officer and you tell them you have a syringe on you, then you can't be held liable for that syringe or the trace amount of drug that's inside it. So it protects officers and encourages safe disposal. And we could do that on a city level. We can do that on a county level. We can do that on a state level. There are solutions that we can combine to actually address the issues that we are worried about.
So basically what you're saying is, okay, your responsibility as SOAR is to get the information out, get the material out to folks to not let the situation get out of hand. Keep it under control. But once the information, once the material is given, now the responsibility lies on the user.
Well, I think what you're saying is, well, I mean, I see it as we are a community that is dealing with these issues, and as a community, we need to come together on these issues. Yeah. It's the war on drugs that got us here. Mm-hmm. It's the trauma living in West Virginia that got us here, and it's us as a community that can address these things. And so, yeah, I think as a community, we need to set up those syringe drop boxes. As a community, we need to restart needs-based harm reduction and give out tons and tons of disposal bins and Narcan. And as a community, we need to pass laws that make people feel comfortable disposing of their syringes. And as a community, we need to get educated on this, which is this, Ray, which is that not once in the entire world has someone been pricked by a syringe and gotten HIV from decades and decades of cases, not once. So it is very scary that there could be a syringe in a playground, and there are some. And it is scary, and we are scared too, and we want to work on that together. And we can hold in that complex truth that those syringes are actually less scary than the HIV that is fanning out and spidering out through our community from not having access to sterile syringes.
Rico, question. Well, here's the thing. Someone brought this to me right here, and I'm going to share this with you. Someone said, what's the difference in SOAR providing all of the material but the drug? What's the difference in that than, say, if you smoke weed and you go to say budget and you buy a bowl, or you say you go to Go-Mart, you buy a blunt, the papers are wrapped with weed and everything, whereas the establishment like Budget and like Go-Mart are providing materials. What's the difference in what SOAR is doing?
I wouldn't see a difference in that at all.
Okay.
Well, and I don't see a difference, except SOAR is providing a way to help for sure. And you got to remember, even with SOAR not in existence, these people are still going to get high. They don't need needles. You can smoke heroin, you can snort pills, you can swallow pills. You're not stopping or you're not adding to the number of users by providing them with clean needles. Oh, and by the way, they also provide condoms and so on and so forth in harm reduction, which would help reduce HIV in the communities as well. So to answer your question, there is no real difference in terms of providing what they're providing versus somebody who's providing pipes or whatever for those who want to smoke weed. You know, the only difference is with weed, there's not a whole lot of other ways you can use it versus, you know, heroin and pills and whatever else you can, you know, there are millions of different ways of using it. They're going to consume it regardless.
Hey, Brooke, I have a question for you. While attempting to reduce harm reduction, how will you go about making sure to not cause any harm in the process to the surrounding residents?
I think it's a great question, and I think it goes back to a question you'd asked earlier that I think we didn't really get back to, the outcry from the community. And I think Joe's alluded to it. I know Rico has. We've made a lot of mistakes, and I don't think any of us would say that we haven't. We absolutely recognize that we've made mistakes, and the setting up on the West Side the way we did, the reasons behind all that are kind of over here. I don't really know that it matters anymore how we landed in the Unitarian parking lot or how we landed. How we landed there is kind of irrelevant at this point. We did make a lot of mistakes, and causing harm to a community is something that we never wanted. I think after a lot of reflection and a lot of talking and a lot of asking allies for a lot of help and understanding the situation that we've helped to, you know, that we've contributed to in Charleston, I think it became really obvious to us that you don't see the harm you cause other people from a place of privilege. We're largely a white-led organization, and Sarah, our counterpart, and I both live on the West Side. We live just a couple blocks from each other, and so you know, we're West Side residents. But the harm that we've been, I guess, perceived harm that we've caused, and the very real harm that people feel that we have caused, I would never argue with. We know that we don't want to cause any more harm. And out of respect, we really tried to listen when people brought this to our attention. And as soon as they did, we recognized we could have done a lot better. And I know we've spent a lot of time as a leadership team talking about regrets and wishing that we had done things a little differently. And we've learned a lot. And moving forward, we're hoping to not cause harm. Again, that was never our goal. It was never our intention. And I don't think that we saw it. We just didn't see it. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
I've argued with it, and I'm going to continue to argue with it. And my argument is this: it comes from these people who perceive themselves as being harmed by SOAR coming into the community. In my opinion, lack full knowledge and understanding of the war on drugs. This is getting rid of SOAR and needle exchanges and harm reduction organizations is nothing but a proliferation of the war on drugs. You have to think back to when it first started with Nixon, and what did they do? They demonized Black people for being drug users. Okay.
Yeah, I remember that. And of course, you know,
all right.
You have with the Black Panther Party.
Right. Well, then you go forward, you talk about the 80s, and you're talking about the war on drugs and crack, and you're talking about Reagan and Oliver North, but they put it in our communities, right? We're still suffering from that in terms of when I talked about a lot of these people not being able to get into drug court, so on and so forth, at least in Kanawha County, one thing you can't have is a prior drug conviction. Who did they put in jail for crack in the 80s and 90s? Us, right? Even the drug users, not the drug dealers. Most of them were drug users. So they can't get the help that they needed. So now you've got people coming into the community, and though they didn't ask permission, they didn't go about it the right way. In my opinion, they should have said, hey, look, this is why we're here, and explained it, to the whole community as much as possible. But they're there now in an effort to somewhat soften the blow of the war on drugs, and as it continues to go forward, because it is continuing to go forward, because we are still disproportionately represented in jails. We're disproportionately represented in as far as who's perceived as drug users. So my issue is when you're saying, well, they're bringing this stuff in our community without asking, right? You need to understand the background, the history, and what is still going on from the war that was started with the initial drug users. The initial drug users in terms of the 70s and Nixon, when they were talking about heroin and opioids, it was us. So now that they're talking about, they advertise and they blow it up as if it's a white issue, and they get all types of help that is not available to us. So, maybe if they understood and knew the ramifications and the fact that it's still going on, and the fact that we're still disproportionately sentenced, even as drug users, not just as drug dealers, they will understand the importance of, especially in the Black community, of why we need this, because we're not getting help anywhere else.
Okay, so Rico, you say they. Who was they?
The people who are complaining about SOAR being in their community, saying, oh, they're creating drug litter. Needle litter. My friend so-and-so OD. They didn't OD because of SOAR.
Ray,
Rico, thank you.
Do you have a sense, Ray, of how many overdose reversal SOARs had since the pandemic started?
No, I don't know. That's why I'm gonna ask you all the questions. You tell me.
Okay, if you insist.
Again, I'm not taking sides again. That's why this is called Our Voices.
Yeah.
To give your side of the story.
Well, I just hope that, when it comes to the COVID vaccine, you encourage people to get vaccinated or put on a mask. There's some public health initiatives that you don't have to have sides. There's just what the evidence says. And unfortunately, the stigma around drug users and drug use and the legacy of the war on drugs makes it seem like there's two sides that can just be shook out with this issue. And there's the side of the best of us, the humanity that we give to the least of us. And then there's the side of stigma and fear that makes it so hard to save lives and prevent disease. So I encourage you to take sides, even if it's a side against us. I think this issue is worthy of sides. But I would, I think it's always worth mentioning in the conversations about SOAR and harm reduction is that we've had 773 saves since the pandemic started. 773 saves,
Good.
Overdose reversals. From being able to distribute, since the pandemic started, more if you start earlier, but since the pandemic started, over 10,000 naloxone doses. That's unprecedented. So how do we do that? We did it by simply doing what the CDC says, which is never turn anyone away. Never turn anyone away. So what is 773 saves? That's 2 saves a day, at least on average for an entire year. That's 1 save every sunrise. That's 1 save every sunset for a whole year. So when we ask about the harm,
that's the possibility of a kid growing up with a parent versus without a parent.
Right.
The possibility of somebody going to rehab and getting their life together and, being able to take care of their kids. That's what it is.
That's what it is. And so these harm reduction programs, they bring out the best of us. They help us save the most lives, and they help us bring out the most merciful side of ourselves. I don't believe SOAR has actually done real harm, except for the harm of perceived defamation. And I think, and again, that comes from a place of privilege, but I think Reverend Farmer's most articulate point on this whole topic is when he went on Facebook and said, concern and service to one does not have to come at the defamation of another. Concern and service to one does not have to come at the defamation of the other. And I think, of course, he's right. And I think, unfortunately, the stigma around harm reduction and around treating and supporting and offering there's so much stigma there that it's defamatory. That to serve people who use drugs on the West Side is like that seems bad. That seems wrong. To say that there's people here that need our help seems wrong, seems bad. But really, I think when the dust settles, and we're big fans of Reverend Farmer. We just dropped off more naloxone at his church tonight. I think these programs actually don't defame us on a long enough time scale when we unite and figure out how to take on the war on drugs together and get at the childhood trauma together and invest in the disenfranchised West Side together when the privileged communities of Charleston can really lean in with the West Side and SOAR is willing to be a part of that pack. I think these programs actually bring out the best of us.
Joe and Brooke, you have issued a formal apology saying that you have dropped the ball, and you say you are willing to do better, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, it is to my understanding that other places, as far as needle exchange, I believe West Virginia Health Right, I believe they have some sort of like a tracking system, mm-hmm. like a needle, like a barcode. Are you all willing to do that? Can you do you have the capability to do that?
It goes directly against what's recommended by Centers for Disease Control. So no, I don't think that's something we would, that's not something we've ever considered, because it goes, it's the exact opposite of what's recommended.
So Brooke, what's really important, which is the figuring out what is stemming from that question. What stems from that question is not, we've talked about building trust with people who use drugs, treating people with the full dignity and human dignity that they deserve. When you start tagging those syringes, you're setting up a system where you're going to punish them. If I find this syringe in that park, I'm going to block you from this program. I'm going to report you to the police. I'm going to da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And that actually makes the problem worse, right? Because then that person's less likely to come to get services. They're less likely to get that naloxone we talked about. They're less likely to get that chance into recovery that we talked about. And that's how we've gotten here. So the biggest question you could ask is, how do we get out of here, right? So we've had Health Right around for years. It is a blessing to the East End. It is a blessing for our city. It is a blessing for our county. And those protocols have not been a blessing for our city and for our county. Those protocols, however, led to 2% of the county being infected with chronic Hep C over the last 5-6 years, and has made space for this HIV outbreak to blanket our city and our county. So we know that we don't just need 30 years of research to know that doesn't work. It hasn't worked in our city. Mm-hmm. It's actually made things much harder. And again, it's not on them, right? Because that's like saying, it's like blaming one diabetes doctor in a county that only had one diabetes doctor. You'd be like, well, actually you need 99 more, right? So we're real admirers, if that's not clear enough, of our colleagues at Charleston Health Right. And we need 99 more programs. We need, in a valley that has some of the worst overdose numbers and HIV numbers and Hep C numbers in the country, we need to blanket our community with best practice harm reduction that will bring out the best of our community and offer us some pathways to healing.
You know what's weird, Ray? You just said that, Brooke and Joe and basically SOAR, they've issued a formal apology for trying to help.
Okay.
You know that, right?
Yeah.
When, especially the Black community, when are we going to request and require a formal apology from prosecutors and judges for disproportionately incarcerating us? When are we going to ask for that? When are we going to make noise about that? When are we going to make noise about the fact that up at the Capitol they're trying to push through criminal justice reform that increases penalties? I mean, when are we as an entire community going to make noise about that issue? I just,
Speak. Yeah, look at, hey, your voice, go. Your voice.
The fucking duplicity, of saying that, of going forward. These people are trying to help. Okay, maybe you didn't like the way they came into the community. But when are you going to say, well, we just make as much noise about the way that they treat us and the whole, as far as this war on drugs, as we have about this locally. That is what would make so much more sense. So you made enough noise that you felt like these people who are trying to help, because they didn't come in the way you wanted them to come in, should shut down what they're doing. But we know for a fact that we are disproportionately sentenced, arrested, and over-policed. We had a young man shot on Friday. At least 3 times. He's still in ICU. You know, when are we going to ask for apologies? Not fuck apologies. When are we going to ask for these people to come forward and take action for the things that they do in our community that actually does harm us?
Good point. Good point. Joe and Brooke, are you willing to partner with other groups to fight the war on drugs?
Absolutely. I mean, the foundation of harm reduction, like there is no harm reduction without racial justice. I realize that SOAR in this moment in time did not do the best job of coming into the West Side community. We would never argue that and moving forward, I think we had spent a lot of time talking about how to incorporate racial justice work into this, with the understanding that harm reduction was built off of knowing how badly we fucked up during the crack epidemic. Harm reduction came out of that understanding we don't ever want another generation of people to go through that again. That's where harm reduction came from. We made a lot of mistakes in Charleston, obviously, but that's where harm reduction came out of. It's making sure that another entire generation of people don't get punished the same way, they don't get treated the same way, they don't die the same way. That hasn't been said yet, and I wanted to make sure that's my piece that I really wanted to make sure was said tonight, just because this is such a layered conversation and such a layered problem, and one community group is not going to fix it. The work that we had done over the last year trying to we partnered with more organizations than I could count in delivering our Saturday services. It was a Wednesday service and it switched to Saturdays. It switched from nighttime to daytime, making sure that we were meeting people where they were at in the way that they needed us to help them, not the way we wanted to help them. And the approach with grassroots harm reduction work is always meeting people exactly where they're at. So an approach like a strict 1-for-1 exchange, or the punitive results that can come from a stricter program. When we talked with people, we realized that wasn't going to work. But this is also an ever evolving process, and emerging issues are always something that we have to take into consideration. And so in moving forward, we want nothing more than to partner with more organizations so that we can be accountable to our community. That's what we want, 110%. There's no doubt in my mind about that. That's the only way that I see SOAR moving forward.
Joe, you said earlier 2 areas of concern. You said the West Side and Canal City. Is that correct?
The city hasn't published its data yet, but from early reviews, we've heard for a couple of years now that those are, as Brooke just hinted at. I mean, the whole city is covered in pain, and there are 2 especially red hot zones: Canal City and the West Side.
And this is also, I mean, this isn't a Charleston problem. This is a Cabin Creek problem. This is help me think of more town names: Montgomery and Rand, Fayetteville. This is a problem that surrounds us and keeps on going farther and farther out. This is Braxton County and Fayette County. This is Putnam County. This is everywhere. This isn't just Charleston. We are not unique. We happen to have a lot of testing in Charleston because the reason testing started was because the Ryan White program partnered with SOAR to come out and do low barrier accessible testing using contingency management strategies to make sure that people were compensated for their time and staying for tests and staying for their test results and being engaged in their own care.
Yeah.
Right. So the testing that came out of SOAR is what alerted the county to the bigger problem that we have. When the testing stopped, we stopped finding so many positives. When we were able to resume, we started finding positives again. Now it's dependent on the hospitals or on street outreach teams to do that testing. And the county providers all over Charleston, especially, Health Right and Health Right, Cabin Creek Health Systems, Family Care, everyone has come together and said, we need more pop-up events. So let's have one. There's one almost every day of the week now, somewhere in Kanawha County. It's amazing. It truly, truly is. And that wouldn't happen without collaboration. I think that that's a really important part too, but the testing that needs to happen can't take place in a clinic. People don't come to care. It's got to take place in the community. And that's why a grassroots approach like this with a low barrier structure is what's best.
Some say that you don't take your operations to South Hills. What's your response to that?
So we kind of gave an abbreviated story of SOAR at the very beginning. SOAR got started driving all around the city, all through Kanawha City. We've made dips into South Hills we've had fairs, kind of flash fairs, but setups on the East End, deep in North Charleston, and certainly we've been active in other parking lots on the West Side. And as we grew, we got more and more chased. We got, again, we talked about that atmosphere of fear. We didn't really, even though RICO had given us legal analysis, we didn't really know for sure how it would shake. So we would set up, and then someone would be like, "You got to get out of here. We're going to call the cops." And we're like, "Well, we want to protect ourselves. We want to protect the people we serve." So we would move on to another parking lot. We move on, and we move on, and we move on. So we were all over the city, and in I think it was September 20. Wait, no, is that right? Yeah, September 2020. We were set up in one parking lot, and we were just getting started. We usually, when we get booted, it would be like a little towards the end. Not all the time we'd be booted. We'd be a little towards the end. You'd be like, all right, time to wrap. Here comes a security guard, but a little bit over. So here we were set up, and it was right as we were setting up. So Brooke's team was getting set up with HIV testing. The food services that we had through another back of a Subaru were getting popped, and our naloxone was getting set up, and all these things were getting set up. We were about to serve like 200 people, and then they were like, "We're going to call the cops. You got to go. You got to go. You got to go." And there's this parking lot that no one used. It's just the fear and stigma, as we talked about. So we called in an emergency. Our friend, the pastor at the Unitarian Universalist Church on Kanawha Boulevard West, and the pastor said, "Well, I hear you're in a pickle. You can set up to tonight at our church." And then that sort of turned into sanctuary. That turned into a place where we felt safe and welcome, where our clients and our participants could feel safe and welcome. And then it sort of turned into, oh, we have a health fair on the West Side, because we were chased all around the city until we were offered sanctuary, and we very gratefully accepted it. It was a very nerve-wracking journey to get there.
Of course, the
question
about not setting up in South Hills, I think there's like 5 of us that hold this together. 5, 6 of us originally that hold all this together. We all have full-time jobs and probably part-time jobs too, and families. And we have a team of incredible angel volunteers. They're angels on earth, real live angels that come and support us. We'd be lost without them. But we are one group serving this many people, one area of town, in our volunteer time with no budget. So that's why we didn't go too many other places. It's nothing more complicated than that. There's nothing more layered than that. It's as simple as we were stretched as thin as you can get before you break, just doing what we were doing on a shoestring budget, figuring out how to fund this every single week. There was no more thought process into it other than, this is what we can do right now. I hope that makes sense. There was no, believe me, we didn't have the energy to be sitting down and, you know, huge strategic planning sessions. It was more like scrambling last minute and everyone get another cup of coffee because we're exhausted. Just keeping people alive. That's truly it. So there wasn't any big reason why we didn't land in South Hills. We did as much outreach to Kanawha City as we possibly could. We have limitations, just like every organization does.
And Ray,
yes, go ahead.
You and every listener of this, if you know a church in South Hills or Kanawha City or the East End or North Charleston or downtown that wants to open its parking lot to have needs-based harm reduction in the spring and summer and fall of 2021, let us know.
Okay.
Let us
We will be there. Bells on.
Okay.
But not right now.
I have a couple more questions, and I'm going to let you all go. Well, I have one more question, and then each and every one of you, I'm going to give you all the last word, okay? Your last word. Amy Goodwin, Mayor Amy Goodwin, she...
Can't hear
you.
Can't hear you.
Amy Goodwin, can you hear me?
Ray, for some reason you went on mute.
No?
There you go.
There you are.
It's better? Okay. Is that better now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Mayor Amy Goodwin is catching a lot of heat over this needle exchange harm reduction issue. Give me your thoughts, your stance on this here, as far as folks attacking her. Where do you stand on that, as far as people attacking the mayor?
What is she being attacked for?
Well, some say that she's not doing enough. Some say that she's soft-hearted,
Not doing enough to support
not
it,
hard.
enough to put it down.
What's that?
She's not doing enough to support it or enough to end it.
Well, I mean, again, they're both sides to it. I mean, they're two sides. So, I mean, again, what are your thoughts on it? Because, again, now, one person said that I believe the pastor of the Unitarian Church stood up and at a council meeting and basically pointed at her and said, you know, we put you in office, you know, as a way of, it sounds like we did you a favor. You know, so my thing is, I mean, has the mayor been accepting to your project, your purpose, your mission, or is she against it?
I think that is a loaded, fun question. I'd much rather have these conversations in person with the mayor.
I'll answer it.
Rico, all right.
I have no problem answering it. I don't have an issue with Amy either way. My issue is with the lack of opportunities for people in the Black community to get services and to get help. So I don't care if it was Amy. I don't care if it was JB. I don't care who's in office. I just know that if the Black community doesn't have some type of help and some type of services, then we are going to suffer, and we have been suffering the most. Because once we get to that courthouse, we get locked up. So opportunities for help in my community are few and far between. So I'm going to continue to welcome and help, if I can, SOAR or anybody else who, in my opinion, is there to provide services that help that does help my community. If somebody can show me otherwise, if this does not help the community, then I'll get out of the way, and I won't help SOAR or anybody else do damage in my community for sure. But you know, I think everybody has a right to their opinion. I have no problems with Amy at all. You know, I don't know what her opinion is on it, but I know where I stand on it. And just like anything else, sometimes Ray and I may get along, sometimes we may not, but that doesn't mean I dislike him.
Yeah, I mean, we had very small handful of meetings with the mayor after the investigation started, but that was with the police chief and, you know, the city chief of staff and whoever else was in those meetings, you know, trying to work on a solution and trying to figure out trying to work on a solution. But I don't think we can speak to the mayor's opinion of us. I wouldn't want to do that. She inherited a city on the tail end of the county harm reduction program shutting down. So I think she inherited a hot mess, and I think she's dealing with it the best way she can. And she's trying to figure out what's right for the community, and she's listening to both sides. And I don't have a whole lot other, you know, I mean, she led her campaign by saying that Joe told me if I'm misquoting this, but it was, you know, the era of stigma in our city is over. That was a lot of what she led that part of her campaign on. So I hope and pray that she can keep fighting for what's best for the city. And I think that that's going to have to involve harm reduction in some way or another. Low barrier harm reduction is what's going to save us from an HIV crisis and a HEP crisis, and you know, endocarditis, and syphilis is on the rise again, and that's largely shared through unsafe sex and IV drug use. So
if we lower those things, wouldn't it also help us economically in terms of people wanting to be here?
Sure would. It would lower the medical costs. The medical cost of treating these diseases alone is enough to break us. And when I consider treating an endocarditis infection, the years of care that's going to cost, the surgeries, everything that's going to come along with that, and knowing that it could have been prevented, just like the HIV case, just like the hepatitis, with a 10-cent clean needle, I still don't quite understand why we're still arguing about syringes, but this is where we're at. And so I think, Mayor's doing, I think, what she can do in a really tough situation. And I hope that she continues to have a lot of courage.
We're going to wrap this up, okay? But before I let you go, you each have 1 minute to give your final word, your thoughts and everything, okay? We'll start with Brooke. Go.
Man, first.
Ladies first. I'm a gentleman, okay?
Harm reduction saved my life, and harm reduction principles is what guide my social work practice. It's what guides a lot of my personal beliefs, meeting people where they're at, and radical love and radical acceptance, and truly working. Harm reduction is hard work. It's hard work. It's challenging, and it challenges me on even like my best days, because it stretches and it makes me grow in ways that I probably wouldn't have thought about before. But harm reduction saved my life, and I've seen harm reduction save a lot of lives. I see harm reduction saving, you know, it's the moms that get their kids back out of foster care, and those kids don't grow up in foster care system. It's the dads that get to be dads again. And I'm 36. So this is you know, our generation of people that this is affecting. It's 25 to just about 40 that I see sick people every single day in my line of work. And I don't want to watch my generation die of HIV. It's completely preventable. And I think harm reduction is the antidote to a lot of things right now.
Rico, you're next.
Our government, our judicial system does not help us in any way whatsoever. So, you know, I think that any program that steps forward and does its best to help us out, when I say us, I'm Black, you know, also, you know, I include Latinx and everybody else in that, you know, people of color. So I'm going to continue to support anybody in any group that steps forward and actually does something other than say, oh, they don't treat us fair, they don't treat us fair, and gets us services that we need. And that includes harm reduction or anything else that could in some way, you know, possibly stem the ongoing war on drugs and the ills that come with it, in this case, HIV and Hep C and the other stigmas that that plague my community. So, yeah, that's where I stand on it.
Joe. Bring it home.
I think if there's any silver lining, I think if there's any silver lining to these reckoning conversations where we're talking about the war on drugs in Charleston, where we're talking about racial injustices that spill into the and through the war on drugs and the way harm reduction, lets us see our community more nakedly, and fears and stigmas and hopes. If there's any silver lining here, it's that SOAR can become a bigger ally in the war on drugs, and can partner with Black-led and people of color-led communities and community groups. There are things we can do together to make real progress. And of course, groups like CARE and the Black Voter Impact Initiative and other groups know this well. There are things we can do together. We can decriminalize marijuana in the city of Charleston. We can get rid of cash bail in the city of Charleston. We can go into those drug courts and set quotas for them so that they don't continue to perpetuate systemic racism in the city of Charleston. We can do this work in the city of Charleston as we're building out harm reduction, as we're trying to get a handle on these infectious diseases and death, so much death. And so we're going to pay a dear price if we keep hammering down on harm reduction, and it's tragic. And if there's any silver lining, it's that we can now get busy and collaborative and find ways to work together to challenge the war on drugs, which keeps so many of our neighbors down, especially our Black and brown neighbors.
All right. Brooke Parker, Joe Solomon, Rico Moore, I want to thank you all for joining our voices. It's been a pleasure talking to you all.
Thank you.
And you all take care, okay?
Thanks,
Don't go anywhere, okay? Don't go anywhere, all right?